406.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 411 from 406. My name is Chewie, and I am joined once again by my brother from another mother, Mr. Pip. How are you, sir?
Doing great, man. This is like the second time we've podcasted in the last month, right? I think we're
We're
improving, right? For
we're
number 101, I think we've got a good start for the next 100 episodes.
we are killing it. Yeah, so we recorded that episode on the 14th of August as we sit here tonight. It's the 18th. So yes, we're one a month, and like I'm pumped because we've got a topic tonight, which is the first time in a long time that we've actually sat down and like done some research and like come in and like ready to roll, right? I'm pumped.
Probably about a year or so. Yeah, we got real lazy and just stopped doing top fives and stopped doing reviews and things like that. But, the season is upon us. And we talked about this. We tipped our hat a little bit to this fact last time we spoke. And I don't know, I got a wild hair up my butt. And this is about the time of year where I start throwing in the horror movies and trying to go through all of them and watch my favorites and maybe even throw in a few newer ones, which is something I actually do want to talk about before we get in. But topic for today is a deep dive on Rob Zombie's Halloween from 2007. This was the reboot, I guess you could call it. This was about the time when reboots, remakes, all that was kind of conflated. And, I think it's fair to say that Texas Chainsaw Massacre in the early 2000s was probably the horror movie that got rebooted that sort of started this craze a little bit. And then there were, a few that followed this movie, but eventually, they got around to rebooting the Halloween series, and they got Rob Zombie, famous from obviously the band White Zombie and his solo career, to come in and do this movie. And I thought it'd be a really fun topic to kind of go over. Did you get a chance to watch it?
I did. I did, and I was pumped that you came up with this idea because I'll tip my hat. Well, this will be interesting. I'll tip my hat a little bit going into this deep dive review. I remember watching and really enjoying this film. In fact, I come back to this one with some sort of regularity. Maybe not every year, but I certainly had seen it within the last maybe 2 years, and I remember this one kind of gets shit on, right? Like, if you look at like Rotten Tomatoes, it's got, like a really shitty score. And it's one of these films that, like, especially when I'm on Twitter, like on Scare Tissue or those kind of things, it's like this one kind of gets shit on a little bit. I don't really get it. And so I'll be interested to kind of get into this discussion and find out like if I'm wrong or like if we're on the same page or like where that kind of hate. There's a couple scenes that I can get it, but like I really don't understand where the hate's coming from. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I got a couple theories right out of the gate in terms of where the hate comes from. And I think the first one, and this is obviously what we'll get into deeper as we kind of go through the movie, but I think the first one is really Zombie's directing style because it's very specific. If you've seen any of his movies that came before this, like The House of a Thousand Corpses or The Devil's Rejects, those movies can be very visceral. They can be very tough to watch because the violence is certainly first and foremost in his style of filmmaking. And I think that there could be some people that come to this movie to watch a quote unquote fun horror movie and have a good time. That's not what this movie is. This movie is not a good time in the same sense that, our horror movie icons from the 80s, usually gave us. So I think that that's maybe one element of it. The other one that I really can't wait to dig in with you is the fact that he makes a concerted effort to spend about half this story telling an origin of Michael Myers. And origin stories, by and large, are very polarizing, I think people either love them or they hate them. I typically love the idea of a or excuse me, I love the idea of an origin story, but if it's not done right, then it kind of ruins everything that comes after it. And one of the things that I definitely want to, have a friendly dance with you about is, did this origin story do it justice? Was it worth it? And, if so, great. If not, I guess what could we have expected, or what would have been a more satisfying result from that? So I don't know. Those are just kind of two things that kind of popped in that I think are big reasons why people had issues with these movies, with this one and its sequel, I should say.
Yeah, I think you're. Yeah, I think the origin story for sure. I think is definitely. I agree there. Um, and you're also not wrong with. I mean, this is very clearly a Rob Zombie film. All you got to do is look at the first 5 minutes, and it's a zombie film. And I think you're right. I think that even though the Halloween franchises and to some degree Nightmare and Friday the Third, these, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like there's a certain level of violence and horror that those movies typically stick to, right? And this one amps it up and makes it more real and more violent and more brutal and yeah, very very quickly, and it's sustained the entire film. Like it there you
Yes.
don't it doesn't let up. It is like literally I've got a note. One of the last notes I've got is like literally the last scene of the movie is just as brutal as the first 5 minutes. So yeah, it is constant.
Yeah, this is one of those movies that I seem to have a memory from back in 2007, having watched this and just feeling completely exhausted afterwards, because it's just such an intense ride from top to bottom, beginning to end. And there's not really a lot of downtime to breathe, or to catch your breath, I should say. It's pretty action packed, from the beginning to the end. So it's exhausting in a sense to watch. So it'll be interesting to see. But have you I guess maybe we should talk a little bit about some of the numbers and things that go around it. Did you look up any of this stuff? Anything that you find interesting or want to talk about relating to
I
that?
did. I did. Yeah. So I mentioned I mentioned Rotten Tomatoes, which I don't put a whole lot of stock in, but just to kind of level set. So I think it's got 28% on the tomato meter, which if I remember correctly, that's like the Rotten Tomatoes like official score, and then 59% is the popcorn meter, which is like I think the fans, right? So and again, to me, that I think that's whether I like this, whether I love this film or not, I think that's really low. The other thing that I thought was really interesting, so it had a budget of 15 million bucks. It still made 80 million bucks, right? So whether even
Yeah.
though which again is why these films keep getting rebooted and getting sequels and prequels and those kind of things because they make money, right? The horror community in general is really forgiving, right? If you look at like the overall franchise, it was the highest grossing film to date of the entire franchise at that point. And even to this, and then obviously, Halloween 2018 kind of came along and blew it out of the water. But this movie made a shit ton of money, and which again, kind of like from the horror lover in me, I'm pumped about that, right? Because I love when a good horror movie comes along and makes money, because it just means we're going to get more horror. So I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, it did really well. One of the best Labor Day weekends that any R-rated movie had ever had up to that point. So there was, it's interesting to sort of see the dichotomy between the really terrible review scores and the fact that the movie made a pretty good amount of money. It profited very well. So it's kind of interesting that it seems to be so separated like that. Um, so one of the things that I kind of wanted to to kind of frame this conversation around is what it's like to watch this movie today versus what we thought back in 2007. Kind of in the sense like, does it hold up? But also just like where, I mean, obviously we're in 2025. This was 18 years ago, which is just crazy how we, excuse me, how we see movies today versus how we used to watch them back then. Because I think this movie felt a little more tame than I remember it being, but also we've had 18 years of horror movies that have sort of escalated on the shoulders of this one to, I don't know, desensitize us a little bit or get us a little bit more used to this level of violence. So I'm going to be curious as we kind of walk through this to determine like what's your experience watching it now versus what you remember about seeing it in 2007. Did you see it in the movie theaters? Do you remember that?
I did see it in the movie theaters, and I actually think that alone is the biggest difference in terms of how I'm experiencing this movie today versus then. So obviously, this is not in the theaters now, so I didn't go see it. I actually bought. There was a Rob Zombie bundle on
Hmm.
Apple, and it was like $25 for Halloween, Halloween 2, House of a Thousand, like five or six of Rob's films.
Oh,
And
wow.
I actually didn't own any of them, so that's what I bought. And and was I was planning on watching it. I actually have this DVR'd, I think. It was recorded, I think, off of AMC, and I started watching it there, and it had commercials, and I got pissed after the first commercial. I said, "Fuck it,"
Yeah.
and so I went and bought it, and so I went and bought it. And I think you're right. I think we have kind of been desensitized, but I also think there's a massive difference watching a movie like this in a dark theater versus on a laptop or on your home video, on your home system or those kind of things, even if it's an ultra violent film. The other thing is, I don't know about you, I did not sit down and watch it all the way through. I think I watched maybe the first hour and 20 minutes or so, and then I came back and I finished. So that kind of, that was just kind of life getting in the way. That kind of bummed me out as well. Um, but you're not wrong though. This is probably not as brutal as maybe I remembered it in 2007. But it's still up there. It's still
Yeah.
up there.
Yeah, for sure. Because I don't think we really knew what to expect in 2007. I mean, even Rob Zombie, I don't know that I had seen his other movies at that time. I think I went back and watched Devil's Rejects. I don't know if I ever actually saw House of a Thousand Corpses, but I think I went back and watched some of his films after I saw this movie because I'm like, wow, okay, this is a very specific style of filmmaking that is pretty intense. I'm curious to know where this all comes from.
Yeah.
And
The
so,
the
yeah.
the other thing that I think is really important to point out is when you're framing this around the previous Halloween films that we had gotten to date, right, up until 2007 versus what we've gotten after that, right? So first of all, the closest film to or the most previous or the most recent film prior to this was Halloween Resurrection in 2002, right? So we had 5 years off. Halloween Resurrection, in my opinion, was not a great film. Before that, we had H2O, which was a pretty good movie. But if you remember those films, they weren't like ultra violent, right? Even if you go back all the way to the original, which I still consider, if not the number one, probably my second favorite all time horror movie, that film is tame by today's comparison,
Oh,
right?
for
There's
sure.
there's almost no gore in it, very little. It's a lot of in the shadows, a lot of what you don't see, like those kind of things, right?
Hmm.
Now, when you compare and contrast that with what we've gotten since that, right? Specifically the last Halloween trilogy, Halloween Kills, and Halloween Ends, those three films, while not as gritty and brutal as Rob's take, they're certainly closer to Rob's take than they were, in my opinion, to the original 1978 film, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of it too. Like when you're comparing and contrasting kind of where what we were coming off of in 2007 versus coming back to this film now, right? It's just the level is very different than it was, if that makes any sense. I feel like I'm rambling, but
No, I 100% agree. I think there's a safety factor, if that makes any sense, when you're watching some of these older movies where it you still feel safe watching those movies. This one felt like it jumped out of the screen a little bit and made the viewer, so uncomfortable that maybe, maybe Michael Myers would reach through the screen and grab you. Like there was just something much more reality based from the way this story was being told. And I mean, I think we get that right from the beginning. Because it starts off, it's got zombies' fingerprints all over it. You've got a Kiss song to start out the movie, and then we get introduced to Michael and his family with this profoundly dysfunctional family that is set around this abusive husband, this struggling mother who's working in a strip club, seductively misguided teenage girl, and then there's Michael who's sit there, he's basically experimenting with killing animals. I mean, this is all in the first 5 minutes of the film. And I just right off the bat, I felt really overwhelmed by, this really excessively vulgar behavior by all of these actors, or by
mhm.
these characters, not the actors. The actors I thought did a fine enough job. But this isn't something that I've really sat through before, so I didn't really know what to expect. But right out of the gate, like there was something that just it almost felt a little forced because it was hard to believe that that this kind of dynamic exists. And I get it that maybe I'm sheltered and had a very good life and didn't have to grow up around this. But I'm curious to know what, in the first 5 minutes, I think you know what kind of movie you're going to get from something like this. And I'm curious to know, was that a shock to your system? Was that something you were expecting? Like where were you to the best of your memory when you started watching this for the first time in this opening scene with this family?
Yeah, I don't think I had seen any of the other zombie films at that point either. So I was right there with you. That I was kind of like, whoa, what the fuck is this? Right. The This is a bad comparison, but it reminded me a little bit of the universe that we were given in The Crow, that like dirty, dingy, like Detroit. It's a bad comparison, but um, it, coming back to it now, like the very first bullet point in my notes here that I made was right from the get go. This is visceral and brutal. That's literally the first,
Yeah.
and again, it's like it's you got William Forsythe, who I think does a really good job as Ronnie. I mean, just the language, and he's disgusting, and he's gross, and he's spitting, and he's just a vile human being, right out of the gate. And you've got Michael there, to your point. You've got the baby there crying, wailing. And it's like, yeah, it is. It's so foreign from the life that I grew up that it's even more difficult to watch, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because you're like, wow, this is just so brutal, is the only word I could use. And that's
Yeah.
before any of the killing or anything happens.
Exactly. So that's an excellent point. What I was just going to say is there's so much depravity and there's so much anxiety around what's going on as I'm watching this. And in the first 5 minutes of this movie, I feel more uncomfortable at this point than I did throughout any Halloween movie I had watched in its entirety. Like it already put me on edge. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I want to be clear about that. It's a stylistic choice by Zombie, but I'm interested, especially when I'm watching this for the first time, because it has already completely knocked me off my feet. I'm on my heels thinking, well, geez, this is not at all what I was expecting. And it's something that is intriguing enough that I want to know where it's going to go. But this is all part of the first. I should have timed it. I didn't think to do that. But this is the first, what, maybe half an hour, 45 minutes of this movie that is the prequel portion, where Zombie is basically telling us that Michael is who he is because of an abusive childhood. So there's some
Hmm.
interesting ideas at play here right out of the gate because it's almost I think he's basically saying that Michael Myers is a human being and he is who he is because of his experiences as a child. So this is a little different from what we've seen in previous movies because he was a shape, he was a supernatural being, he was cut off his head and he came back for more kind of thing. They humanized him a little bit, at least in this movie they did, and and I thought that that was interesting. But in doing that, they kind of put themselves in a corner to tell a really good, effective story as to what created this monster that we will all come to know. And I guess that's my long rambling way of stumbling into asking you what I think is one of the most important questions is did they do this right? Or is it believable that this kind of abusive childhood would lead to what we end up seeing from him later in the film?
Um, yes, it is for me. It's believable. Yes. Um, we can talk about whether or not we needed an origin story for Michael. Um, th- I actually really enjoy this section of the movie. Enjoys the wrong word. The, the origin story from Michael um, is some of the most intriguing portions of this movie for me because I think you can see why he does some of the things that he does. You can see, his very first kill, if you're not counting um animals, is like the bully, right? And the bully
Hmm.
at school was clearly, again, was just another vile human being, but he was an asshole and he was picking on Michael, and he had a newspaper of his mother, from the strip club and those kind of things. And you could see, Michael snapped, right? And the I think they do a really, I won't say they do a good job, but the concepts of masks in this movie, I think, is really interesting, right? It's like it's not just a William Shatner mask that somebody grabbed off you know what I mean? Like there's more to the mask
Hmm.
for this version of Michael
Yeah.
than in any other Halloween universe, right? I'm not sure I quite get it, but there's clearly an importance to the mask. He does things with the mask off that he won't do it with it on, and those kind of things. Um, and let me put it this way: at the very least, logically I can see how he gets from the kid in the very first scene to the guy at the end of the movie. How about that? I
Yeah.
can Rob Zombie does a good job connecting the dots. I'll say it that way.
I mean, I think I mostly agree. I will say that, again, sitting through that first, whatever it was, half an hour of it, like it was so uncomfortable for me that it made it more plausible that if he lived
Right.
with that every day of his life, he could grow up to be a really twisted individual, right? But I tell you what, some of it felt kind of rushed to me as I was watching it
Hmm.
with my 2025, glasses on, and I don't know if it was rushed or if in the benefit of today's uh you know being able to view it through today's eyes. The I don't know if this thought ever crossed your mind, but I couldn't stop thinking this the entire movie. This should have been a series. This should have been a Netflix series because I think
Hmm.
it's pretty clear that Rob Zombie, if it were up to him, I think he would have stayed with that prequel story longer than he actually did. And there was a point where he's like, I got to start making the movie with the guy in the mask and the killing and Laurie Strode and all that. But I kept thinking to myself, man, if Netflix was a thing, well, it was a thing in 2007, I think, but that's when they were sending the DVDs in the mail.
Right. Right.
Um, if I remember correctly, I might even be wrong about that. I don't remember timeframes, but obviously there were no series on multiple streaming networks. But this, I think, could have lent itself very well to that because I think if they would have taken more time two, three, four episodes to really dig into why Michael was the way he was, then it would have been a more logical graduation into the serial killer mode. It felt quick to me, but also, that's it's not fair to hold that against them that they didn't do a series because that really wasn't a thing back then. But that's
Yeah,
kind of what I just couldn't get out of my brain.
yeah, I think you're right. I think it's um there's obviously I don't know Rob Zombie at all, but I can see my perception is that there's a lot of love given from the director to that first half an hour of the film, right? I think
Hmm.
Rob really, to your point, I think really enjoys that section, and because that's all new material, right? He wrote that, he came up with that origin, that's all his, right? And then when it changes, and it changes very abruptly, well, there's a little kind of middle section where Michael is in kind of not loony bin, but he's incarcerated before we get to effectively the retelling of the 1979 film, right? But everything up until then, to your point, I think Rob really enjoyed that that version of the story, or like that section of the universe. And then again, not that he's like phoning it in, but like once you get to the Halloween that we know and love, it's I can't really articulate it. It's a long way of saying I agree with you. I'm not sure what a series would look like, but I think, yeah, if you had 6 episodes, 8 episodes to tell that, you could really start to show why Michael is who he is, right?
Yeah.
It wouldn't just be killing the bully, right? It might be an entire episode of him just getting his ass kicked by multiple bullies and getting yelled at the entire time by Ronnie, and having Ronnie put cigarettes out on his skin, whatever it is, right? And you could be like,
Right.
"Oh, this is why he's the way he is," kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, in that bully scene that you mentioned, like I could see that being sort of the culmination of one of the episodes,
Right.
if it were broken out into a series that he gets bullied the whole time and then sort of the third act of that episode is him snapping and doing that. Whereas they kind of rushed it, but I actually really like what they did with that specific scene in this movie. That was probably the most jarring scene in any Halloween movie that I ever saw because it was just terrifying to watch. When that kid goes into the woods and Michael comes out of nowhere and just beats the shit out of him with
Hmm.
they have a hockey stick or a branch
Or
or
a
something like
branch, yeah.
that. And, this is the first kill. It's about 10 minutes into the movie. And I remember being in the theaters and being just like physically like, ugh, like that was really, really difficult to watch. He had that, the thing that really did it for me was, right before he dies and they show his face and he's got this blood on his face, but it's like this dark blood. It's not this cherry red kind of color, which you're used to seeing, in films, when there are violent things happening, but this is like it felt like it came right from his gut, and it was just. I mean, I have my notes say visceral. I know I've used that word once or twice, and I think you have too. But God, that's a great word to use to describe some of the deaths in this movie for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and it's I the other thing that is really interesting to me that they don't really explore, and I if they were to do a series, I think this is the kind of thing that they could explore. Michael goes from being this um killer, right, in the woods, right? I mean, he's I don't know how old he was.
Yeah,
Um and then like almost immediately he it's like he forgets, and he goes back and he's with his sister, and he's like the nice big brother again, right? And then there's another scene where he's talking to Loomis, and he's like, "Can I go home?" Right? He's clearly forgotten like everything that he's done, right? And he even asks his mom at one point, which was heartbreaking. He was like, "How's everybody at home?" Like he doesn't know. And again, I've fast forwarded a bunch, but like he doesn't know what he's done, and I don't know if that's like his mind, um, you know, making
Yeah,
him forget, like, but I would have liked to have seen some more exploration of that, because that to me is fascinating.
yeah, I agree. I think that was really interesting. I couldn't tell based off of the performance by the kid, which I thought was good. I didn't think it was great, but I thought it was good. But I couldn't tell if that was just an acting issue or if he was. I couldn't understand why he didn't know that. I didn't. I'm trying to figure out the right way to say this. I couldn't tell if he was fucking with her or not. Like if he knew exactly what he did, but he was kind of messing with her, or if he genuinely didn't remember what had happened. And of course, we can back up a few steps and talk about it. But he obviously, after not getting to go trick or treating, he kind of flips. Although there's not really a moment where it feels like he flips. He's just sitting on the front porch of his house, eating candy corn, and then just basically gets. Well, I guess he moves into the table in the living room, and then decides to just duct tape his stepdad and slit his throat.
Yeah.
And then, and of course I wrote this down, but I'm like, how fucking drunk do you have to be to get duct taped to a chair without waking up? Like, you got to be pretty ripped, right? I,
So
I mean, that just, I laughed at that because I'm like, how is this happening right now?
I'm gonna read two bullets to you. I'm going to read them word for word. And this just kind of goes to show that we kind of do share the same brain. So the one bullet is so nonchalant, goes from flicking candy corn to grabbing duct tape and a butcher knife, right? And then the next and then the next bullet is, how the fuck do you get that duct taped and not wake up?
It was around his mouth, right? Like he
His
couldn't.
mouth is everywhere. Yeah.
But that is one thing I kind of had a problem with because I don't I didn't see a moment where he snapped. I mean, I saw bad things happen to him and I saw him react, but I was sort of waiting for this fall off the cliff moment for him that I didn't get. And maybe that's just not what he was trying to do. Maybe he was trying to tell the story that he was, mentally distraught or damaged from the beginning. But it to me it happened in a way that felt a little stilted. I don't know if you felt that way or if you were just kind of going with it. I mean, I think either way is fine, but that's kind of how I
So
thought.
I can understand what you're saying. I actually think that was a directorial choice, though. And the reason I say that is, like I said, 10 minutes later, the kid says, is everybody okay at home? And when can I go home? And I don't think that was an acting choice. I think that was he just genuinely didn't know. And then if you fast forward way, way, way to the end of the film, um, he goes and he'll pull out a picture, and like he becomes like the little boy again. You know what I mean? Like the rampage is gone for a moment. So I
Yeah.
really do think so. I guess to answer your question, yeah, I was just kind of going with it. I do think though that um I think that was kind of part of the character. Like he would literally go from back and forth. Um, I'm still not quite sure they did a great job with his reasons for some of the stuff that he did, but I do think it's kind of speaking to just kind of mental break, a mental issue, and I do think that was a choice by Rob. Maybe I could be wrong, but
No, I think that's totally fair. I guess my hang up was this is a prequel story or a
yeah,
prequel preamble to the rest of the movie. I just expected a little bit more explanation. Like I could guess that maybe he had a rough childhood, but we don't necessarily see it take shape the way that I think I expected it to. But also they didn't have a lot of time to do that because they had to cover a lot of ground because after this he goes and he kills his sister and her boyfriend. Both kills were just absolutely brutal.
yeah,
Especially the boyfriend. I think that one might have been one of the hardest ones for me to watch in that movie because he just goes up behind that kid with an aluminum bat and
just
just
beats
breaks
him.
his head open.
Yeah,
And that was, and then there's the scene where it shows the kid under the table and his like feet are twitching and it's like wow. And then of course he hits him like five or six more times. Like that's kind of zombie style, right? Like he just kind of keeps going and going. and then he goes upstairs and he kind of messes with his sister for a little bit, and there's this kind of weird sexual kind
Yeah.
of incestual thing going on. And then we hear the music for the first time, which I thought was an interest. No, I'm sorry, that's not right, actually. We hear the music for the first time when he runs out of the school before he attacks the bully. That I thought, from just a pure music cue standpoint, was very odd. Like they didn't wait till he found the mask the first time to play the
Hmm.
the very traditional Halloween music. They didn't even play it, if I recall correctly. When he put on the mask, they played the sort of the dun 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 dun,
Hmm.
like the real suspenseful music. But they chose weird times to insert the main theme for him while they did that. But I don't know. Maybe that's just me. I'm a music guy, and I'm always listening for those cues and how that fits together.
Yeah, I got my note here is 22 minutes in, and we hear the piano done on. I don't remember exactly when that was, but it was 22 minutes in. So yeah.
I think it's when he
Um,
puts on the mask and chases her after he stabs her, after he's put on the mask and he's kind of chasing her down the hallway and she's trying to, pull herself
okay.
away from him. And that's when I think it finally hits, if I recall.
Okay. Okay. Um, yeah. One side note. So Judith, who's the sister that he kills there, was played by a gal named Hannah Hall, who was young Jenny in Forrest Gump, which blew me away.
Oh,
I
wow.
was just yeah right. I don't know. I just like I don't think I've ever seen her in anything else, but I looked her up. Yeah, that was young Jenny, yeah, in
Oh,
Forrest Gump.
wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Well, there's another kid in this movie that I didn't realize until actually this time watching it through. If you may not recognize him because he's like almost 30 years old now, but the kid that plays Tommy Doyle is his name is Skylar Gisondo, I think is how you pronounce it. And he was in the Vacation reboot with Ed Helms. He was in the new Superman movie. He's
Oh,
in Righteous Gemstones. Like he's a very recognizable face with the freckles and everything. And I was like, wow, that's got to be him. I thought that was really interesting because I
huh.
didn't realize he was in that movie.
Yeah.
But then we kind of move the story forward. So there's this there's this sort of black and white montage scene of Sherry Moon Zombie, who plays Michael's mother, and she's kind of having this breakdown. And then, as she realizes what's happened, which I thought was shot really well. And then, of course, we get to the sanitarium, which is where Michael is. And then we meet Dr. Loomis for the first time, which I think is interesting. Um, I heard some people say that they thought Dr. Loomis was one of the best parts of this movie from an acting perspective, and I do think he was good. I'll go on record of maybe he wasn't the best part of this movie from an acting perspective, but I thought he did pretty good. But I thought it was interesting, and this is something that you mentioned earlier that you haven't really seen or don't have any memories of Halloween 2, the sequel of this movie. But it's really hard for me to disassociate what they did with his character in the second movie while I'm watching this one because I know where it's going to go. And it's interesting. Like I find it harder to watch him in this movie because of what they did with him in the second movie. And I know you probably don't have that same experience without having remembered that, but I just thought that was really interesting, and I'm curious to know what you think about Loomis and Malcolm McDowell's portrayal of him. Obviously Donald Pleasance made this role what it was prior to this, and he's the second guy, as far as I can tell, to ever play this character. Like, did you think he was a positive sort of bright light in all of this?
Um, I think Malcolm McDowell did a really good job with this role. I think he plays Loomis in this role is not nearly as he it, Donald Pleasant's version of Loomis. He's all about trying to understand Michael, if I remember correctly, right? He doesn't think he is redeemable, right? He refers to him as pure evil, you know, blah blah blah. He doesn't think he's redeemable, but I never get the impression that he has ulterior motives around Michael. Whereas this version of Loomis, you know, he sells a book. He's out there to make a buck. He's not that he's exploiting Michael, at least initially. I think initially this version of Loomis, I don't remember, did he sell the book? I can't remember exactly, but like I think initially he was out to genuinely try to help Michael, and then he like kind of stops talking, right? And I think eventually he's just kind of like, well, fuck it. Like if you like, I can't. There's nothing else I can do. And then I think kind of human nature takes over, and he's like, well, hey, like I'm the guy that's closest to him, and he sells a book. I, so I don't think he's a bad character. I think he's probably a flawed character.
That's fair.
He's a human character, and yeah, I think actually Malcolm McDowell does a good job as the character. Do I like him more than Loomis than Pleasance? No, I don't. I think the Loomis character in the original series I think is more likable, but I think this one is more real.
Yeah, I think I had trouble with Loomis in this movie and obviously in the next one, if we ever get around to talking about that. And I think you're right. And that's maybe the perspective that I haven't really explored is that Zombie was trying to set that up. It wasn't a failure on Zombie's part to make an efficient protagonist. I think he was trying to make a flawed individual and, was telling the story of somebody who maybe tried to help him in the beginning, but eventually decided it would be easier to make a buck off of his story, which is kind of where we see him, not to flash forward too soon, but like when Michael is an adult and
Hmm.
Loomis comes in and says, "Hey, I'm leaving. I'm not coming back here." At that point, he's already written the book. He's already sold the book. He's already made the decision that Michael can't be helped. And I guess I thought that the Loomis character would kind of be the white knight, for lack of a better term. And
Hmm.
I guess that what I had to come to terms with, and it maybe took me too long to do this, is that there are no characters like that in this movie. There are no white knights. Rob Zombie doesn't want that. He doesn't want the sort of your stereotypical standard protagonist, antagonist, good, pure white good guy, pure black bad guy kind of scenario. And so maybe that was just why it was, because I was kind of hoping that that would be. I think the only person that really is trying to be good all the time might be Michael's mom. She's trying. She's flawed as well, but like she's trying to be there for him through this whole thing until she just can't do it anymore, which
Yeah.
is brings us to that scene where she is at home and she's watching those home movies and she ends up taking her own life. And that to me, I'll just go ahead and say I don't think Sherry Moon Zombie is a very great actress, and I don't think she does a great job in this movie. But that scene in particular, I thought was really well done and really, really hard to watch.
I think you're right. I think Zombie again. I don't think he wants any character to be that white knight. I'm with you. I'm not a huge fan of Sherry Moon Zombie. I mean, she's nice to look at, but and Rob always puts her in, you know, like puts her in his
Right.
films and whatever. But yeah, I thought she was fine, and I didn't think she was bad. I didn't think she detracted. I do think I agree with you. I think she did a good job in the like in the scenes where she was with Michael, specifically like the scene where she goes to school and she's like kind of pissed off that she has to go there and those kind of things. I think those are some good performances. And again, this her suicide scene I think is really well done as well. One more note about Loomis. E- Even though I don't necessarily like this version of Loomis, he's way better than the Loomis in like the quote unquote Loomis. I think it was Sartain in the
Oh
new.
God.
How
Yeah.
that guy was terrible. So, anyways,
Yeah. I didn't like him either. That
yeah,
was that was weird.
yeah,
So this kind of brings us to the end of the quote unquote prequel preamble to this story.
yep.
And I think what I'm hearing from you is that you overall like you liked it, you thought it was satisfying. It sort of scratched the, origin story itch that you had. And I'm kind of curious if you could call back to where your brain was at When you saw this movie the first time, did you expect there to be some sort of a supernatural flavor to this, or did you kind of did you predict that the direction that this was going to go was really more of a, rough upbringing, and that's how we got this killer? Because again, like I mentioned, Michael Myers in previous movies was he was more of the shape of evil, supernatural, kind of a ghost zombie type character. In this one, he's very much human. And I'm kind of curious to know, it sounds like you're satisfied with it, but argue with me if you're not. And if regardless of that answer, I guess, is that what you were expecting?
Yes, I think I was satisfied with it. I really don't remember what I was expecting. Michael to me has, even though he's been the shape and even though he's like quote unquote indestructible, Michael to me was of the, we'll call it the big three or four, right? Michael to me was always the most quote real. He was
Hmm.
certainly more real than Freddy. He was even even more real than Jason to me. I don't know why, but he was always more real. And so um like I was never a big fan of like zombie Jason. I was never a big fan of like, you know what I mean? Like I was that, and even in the, and again I know it's a different universe, but like in the last Halloween movies that we watched, I always really do have a hard time with the amount of damage that these guys can take.
Yeah.
You can only suspend, for me at least, you can only suspend disbelief for so much, for so
Right.
long. Um, and so I guess maybe I was kind of hoping for a realistic answer, a realistic take on why Michael is who he was. And
Hmm.
I think why I was okay and satisfied with that kind of first 40-minute preamble was, yeah, it was a satisfactory answer to why he became who he was. So
Okay. Great. Yeah, I think I would agree for the most part. I think that it does make sense. I wasn't sure if they were going to go more of a, because when we ended sort of the last series with the Curse of Michael Myers and the thorns and all that stuff, like they
yep.
were setting up this very sort of witch-like
Hmm.
culture, demonic possession kind of thing, and I didn't know if they were going to continue that theory into this movie, but it doesn't sound like they did. It sounds like they just made him, pure evil, or the humanized version of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then after the terrible suicide scene with Michael's mom, they flash forward 15 years and we find Michael as an adult. Dr. Loomis, as I mentioned, he's trying to say goodbye to Michael, basically saying, "Hey, I wrote a book and I'm out of here." And that kind of really sets the stage for what we're going to see from him in the sequel, as far as specific to Dr. Loomis. And then, of course, we get we get some super contrived prisoner transfer thing,
On
which
Halloween, of
on
course.
Halloween, of course, we're going to do it on Halloween. And of course, we're going to transfer him to where? I don't know. But the most interesting thing for me in this whole scene in the movie is a very special cameo from a police academy alumni, Lieutenant, I think she was Lieutenant Callahan,
Yep.
Leslie Easterbrook, who I have not seen, prior to or since. I haven't seen her in anything but a Police Academy movie, and she shows up so randomly. I think she was in a couple other zombie movies, so I believe so. So this isn't completely random in that sense. But did you catch that when you watched it?
I did, yes, I did. She is a very recognizable actress, especially based on the way she was introduced to me during
Sure.
Lieutenant Callahan was a very memorable character for a couple of reasons,
Right.
and
Two, two very specific ones.
two specific reasons. And yeah, so yes, I saw her, and I appreciated that. I didn't know, if she's got a relationship with Rob or like why she was there or anything like that. But yeah, I like seeing her. There was a couple other who else was there was a couple other cops that I recognized there. God, who else was there?
I think Bill
Um,
Moseley was one of them.
Bill Moseley was one. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
He's also a mainstay in some of Zombies movies. And I guess maybe this is an interesting point to interject that there was an unrated version of this movie, and the one that I watched was the rated version, the R-rated version of this movie. But there was an unrated version too that had some extra scenes in it, including a rape scene that happened in the sanitarium. I think they had, after they had pulled Michael out of his cell, those police guards had pulled some girl into his cell and raped somebody either right in front of him, or there was some kind of really brutal scene there that I guess obviously didn't completely fit in the movie, so they took it out. But they inserted it back into the unrated version of the movie. I don't know which version
Okay.
you watched, but I watched the rated one.
I did not see that one. So yeah, mine must have been the R-rated version.
Yeah. We another interesting, I guess, aspect of this particular scene is with Danny Trejo, who plays the
Yes.
security guard, who, we've been told has known Michael since he was a kid and has been kind to Michael. And as Michael is escaping, he essentially brutally murders Danny Trejo as well, which is kind of the movie's way of saying, hey, he's there's no recovery from what he's going through. He is the quintessential bad guy. He doesn't have any soft spots for anybody, regardless of who they are, how they've treated him,
Right.
which is going to get turned on its head a little bit when he does meet Lori towards the end of the movie. But for right now, basically, he is all evil at this point. And
What,
we yeah,
hey,
go ahead.
were you I was really rooting for Danny Trejo to live. Were you was was that weird of me? Like
No,
I really wanted my I mean not in the sense of, oh, I like that actor, right? It wasn't that. It was like I was really hoping for, and I think it would have worked in the movie. I was really hoping for a little, just some semblance of humanity from Michael. You know what I mean? Like again, he could have let that guy go, right? And it wouldn't have changed the movie at all. You know, and maybe this is just, maybe it just kind of speaks to the brutality of a zombie universe. But even a quote unquote friend, to your point, fucking dropped a, drowned him and dropped a, a TV on his head to kill him, right? And I don't know. Yeah, it bummed me out because I was really hoping for a little bit of a little let up from the brutality.
yeah, I see where you're coming from, but I would counter that by saying I think it would have damaged the character for him to let him live, because we
It might,
have to hate Michael Myers. We have not hate him. We have to be afraid of Michael Myers. We have to believe that even as deep down as you can go in this man's soul, he has no empathy for anybody,
yeah.
including the people that have even treated him right. And I think that we as viewers become too conflicted with whether we're rooting for Michael or whether we're not. And I don't think we're supposed to be rooting for him. But if he even shows a little bit of mercy along the way, then we kind of start feeling like, oh, he's Darth Vader, like there's good in him still, but we just need the right person to bring it out. And I think that that's dangerous to let the audience know that he might be redeemable, because we're not supposed to be rooting for him. At least that's my take on it. I could be wrong on that too, but that's
No,
how I saw it.
that's fair. It is fair. I guess that doesn't quite jive with, like, there are kids that he lets go later in the film. And maybe
Yeah,
that's just a,
that's more
but
contrivance, I think.
yeah,
I
yeah,
I don't think that's logic. I think that's, we don't want to kill. a few of the, well, I mean, there's only, I guess there's only one kid technically he lets go, right? Or doesn't
There's two.
finish.
There's two. There's two. There's the two baby the kids that they're babysitting. Tommy and
Oh,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah, I guess I totally forgot about them. Yeah, I think he's at that point in the story, he's focused on Lori and he's zoned in on her and maybe doesn't, doesn't care about the
Tr-
kids. I don't know.
true, true. But and again, I know it's a different version of the universe. If you remember in the Joseph Gordon-Levitt, no, who did those last three?
David Gordon Green.
David.
Close.
Okay, okay.
Very
If
close.
you remember, in those films, he was walking through a house at one point, and there was a baby in a crib, and he let the baby go too. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't know. Maybe that's
Yeah,
his. Maybe that's his. Anyways,
sure.
different movie,
No,
but
that's yeah,
yeah,
different movie, different director, different
yeah.
story. But yes, I do understand what you're saying though. So we get this kind of forgettable scene in the truck stop where he beats up this giant dude just to get his jumpsuit. I mean, I don't know about you. I didn't need to know how Michael got his clothes. The mask is certainly an iconic part that we would like to see, but I don't know. You could just break into a Goodwill or a thrift store and
Yeah.
get the jumpsuit. I don't need this scene as much as I don't it's not the violence that I scratch my head at. It's the why are we here? Why are we doing this? It just seemed like we had to tell this part of the story, which didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, this to me. So two things about this. One is I don't need to see Joe Grizzly looking at porn while taking a shit. Like I don't need to see that at all, right?
And talking to himself, like sexing
Yeah,
himself up while
right,
he's doing
right,
this. It's just like,
right.
oh
And
God.
yeah, and then to your point, this to me feels um like Han Solo getting his name in Solo, right? Like
Yeah,
we don't,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like we don't
right.
need to know where he got the dice, where he got his last name. Like we don't need to know that. Yeah, to your point, it's very
Yeah.
contrived.
But we skip forward and then we get to meet finally Laurie Strode, the primary protagonist in the Halloween story. We also get to see a familiar face in Dee Wallace, which I was very happy about. I think she's a endearing actress. I loved her in E.T. as Elliot's mother, and of course she's had her chops in various horror movies like The Howling, and I believe she was in Cujo too, right? Am I right about that? I don't know.
I believe that's correct. Yeah.
That might be right, but she was definitely in The Howling. Um, and then, Michael does eventually find his mask, which I think is, a very nice and very powerful moment. And that's when Lori, played by Scout Compton, um, finally she doesn't get face to face with him, but like she goes up to the house and he's right there. So he somehow latches onto her at that point or realizes who she is. Now, we're not told at this point in the movie that she is his baby sister, although I think it's somewhat logical to put those pieces together. But and I'm not gonna, this next question that I'm gonna pose to you is kind of stealing it from the Now Playing guys. So I don't want to get accused of ripping them off, but it's a good question. And if you didn't re-listen to their podcast of this, then I'll assume this is kind of a fresh question for you. But how does Michael know that that's his younger sister? Are we told in some way, shape, or form how he comes to? I mean, I know that we don't know why he's necessarily going after her. I mean, I think we're kind of eventually told that he's trying to bond with her at some point, but how does he put two and two together to figure out who and where she even is?
I don't know. We if there is some way for the character of Michael to know that, we are not shown that, we are not told that, we are not given that sort of metadata at all. So I agree. It's a very
Okay.
valid question. Um, no, because again, I mean, he was 10 and she was an infant, and there's no way. There's
Yeah.
no now. Yeah.
And
Now,
she's been
what I
renamed and she was moved to a
right,
different city.
right,
We're going to find out later in the film that Sheriff Brackett was actually the one that had a hand in that. Like
yes.
he tells that to Loomis as they're driving around looking for Michael Myers, that he found the baby and he had her, I guess, rehomed or adopted or something, like a few
Well,
towns
no,
over. And
yeah, so, no. So what he did, so that section I actually really like. So this is again fast forward for a while. This is when then the kind of shit's going down already. And what he says is he was the one that was on the scene during Michael's mother's suicide.
okay.
He got there and the baby was there. So it was just Sherry Moon and the baby. He said he omitted the baby from the police report, which was remarkably illegal, but he did it. And he took the baby to a couple towns over and left it at like a fire station or a hospital or whatever. Then,
Oh,
the,
okay.
right, then the dumb fucking luck, the Strodes, who was his friend, told him, "Oh, we adopted this baby from a couple towns over." So yeah, so like at that
Not how
point,
adopting works, but sure. Yeah.
it's not, but but I actually really like that twist on it, right? Like
I do too.
I
Yeah.
appreciate like that's still a plausible. Again, it's a flawed character in the zombie universe.
Sure.
The,
Sure.
the sheriff does like the bad thing for the right reason. I'm not sure that I would have allowed the daughter, the kid to then grow up in Haddonfield. Like,
Well, yeah.
I but anyways,
But
yeah, go ahead.
well, I was going to say what it does, and you don't know or may not remember this yet, but it sets up a very complicated confrontation in the sequel because, as you might guess, Lori eventually finds out in the sequel who she is, and
Yeah, because she does
he
not find out in this movie, does she? She
no, she
doesn't
does
know.
not, and,
Yeah.
and and he eventually feels very guilty and very responsible for doing that because obviously he tried to help but didn't do it enough, didn't do his part. How he can just omit a baby from a police report and nobody raises their hand saying, "Yeah, didn't the Myers family have like another baby?" And it's like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
not a big deal.
So let me read you a couple of my bullet points here for kind of this section of the movie, and I think you'll get a kick out of some of these quotes, right? So Michael goes back to the house to retrieve his mask and his knife. Okay.
Hmm.
So are we supposed to believe this is what Rob Zombie's telling us that a 10-year-old kid managed to put the mask and a 13-inch butcher knife under the floorboards before the cops got there and they never found a murder weapon? Like they're just like, yeah, whatever. I guess, right?
Yeah,
So
I mean,
I
it's more plausible than
well,
omitting a kid from a police report,
okay.
I
Well,
think.
but again, my
Yeah.
point is, so like if you remember that first murder, right? So you had the guy with his head bashed in, Judith who had been stabbed. I don't know. And again, so Michael's just again no mask. Again, the mask is okay, fine, but then I don't know. I found it hard to believe that they wouldn't have at least found the murder weapon.
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible. I also think that one thing that we haven't really mentioned in this podcast yet is that this movie does take place in, I'm sorry, not this movie, but the prequel portion of this movie takes place, I believe, in the early 80s. So, I mean, it's possible that
Okay,
maybe
that's fair.
maybe police investigations weren't as, I mean, I would think even in the early 80s, they would be looking for murder weapons, but, pre-internet, pre-cell phones, pre-technology, pre-computers for that matter, maybe we're just supposed to believe it's a podunk town with a podunk police department that just, you know, they were so horrified and shocked by the events that happened that they know who did it. Maybe they didn't need to find the weapon. I,
Maybe. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't see the
Well,
significance of keeping the knife personally. Like that didn't make any sense. The mask obviously is a lot more iconic, but the butcher knife, It's
Yeah.
not, I mean, I guess it's iconic in itself, but not that one knife. Like he could have just found
Right.
another one, broken in somebody's house and grabbed another one. I don't know why they had to make a big deal about pulling that out of the floorboards, but the mask, obviously it does. And I will say, the mask looked fucking
Oh, it
badass.
looks so good.
This was
Yeah.
the best looking mask, maybe in the entire series of all Halloween movies, and certainly better than the last couple, Halloween
Uh,
Resurrection or Halloween 4 and 5. Like those were terrible. I don't remember H2O very well, but like it was pretty clear like they just took something off the shelf and made something. But like this one looked really rugged. It looked
yeah.
really sort of worn and pretty scary. Like the definition of the features on the face, I thought were really well done.
No, I agree. Yeah, this mask and then the mask from the last trilogy I thought was really well done. But you're right. Th- those Halloween 4, 5, Resurrection, H2O, some of those were just like god awful. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we end up seeing a familiar face. This is the first time we're going to mention her name on this podcast, but Danielle Harris comes back, uh, who we knew as Jamie Lloyd from the Halloween movies 4 and 5 specifically. And I kind of tipped my hat a little bit earlier that I thought there was maybe a better performance than Malcolm McDowell in this movie, and I think it might be Danielle Harris. I really think she does a fantastic job in this movie. She doesn't have a lot to do, but what she does, I think she does really well. She does even better in the second movie, in my opinion. Same kind of scenario, she doesn't have a lot to do, but I think her character is really powerful, and it makes me appreciate her a bit more as an actor with what she does. But it's nice to see her back, and I thought it was an interesting yet bold choice to bring her back as a teenager in this movie because this movie was made in what 2007. We were
Hmm.
both I know for a fact that she is our age. I think she was we share a birthday, Danielle Harris and I do.
Yep.
And I believe she might be a year, I don't remember if she's a year older or a year younger. She's
I think she's younger than you. Yeah.
okay, so she's 1 year in that direction. So in 2007, she was 31 years old playing a 16-year-old. And I didn't have a hard time buying that. Like she played it really well. And I thought she did really good in this movie.
I agree. So I have to say, do you listen to Talk Scary to Me? Do you listen to that podcast?
I've listened, it's been a little while. I
Okay.
listened to it a lot in the beginning when it kind of first started up, and I haven't listened to it as much lately, but
Okay.
I have heard a couple interviews, recent interviews with her lately talking about some of these movies. Um, so yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so I listen to most of them, depending on kind of who the guest is and those kind of things. But Scout and Danielle, I like their podcast. I like listening to them. And I really like seeing them on the screen here, right? When I first saw this movie, I knew Danielle Harris. I don't think I knew Scout at that point. Probably not. This was one of Scout's first or kind of big. I think it was one of her first like big roles,
Yeah.
at least that I had seen. I agree though. Danielle does great here. She looks great. She looks like a teenager. She like. I mean, um, she's acting her ass off. She's doing really well. Um, Scout does good too here. She does good too here. That was a really weird fucking sentence. Scout does well. I think it's impossible not to compare Scout's performance to Jamie Lee Curtis, right? Where I think Danielle gets the benefit. You don't necessarily compare Danielle to the actress that did Annie in the original.
Yeah.
Um, fair. At least I didn't.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and say this, and this may be a unpopular hot take. I don't think that Jamie Lee Curtis did anything particularly magical in the first
Oh,
Halloween
I
movie.
I agree
I
with
think
that
she's a
100%.
great actress, and she's certainly the original Scream Queen and all of that. But in terms of like acting prowess, I don't know that she benefited from being in that movie, and I thought she did good. I'm not saying she was gave a poor performance, but also like I don't remember that movie for the acting. I just that's not how I remember it specifically. I think Scout Compton probably a little underrated with how well she did in this movie, especially and probably more so towards the end. I feel like the sort of the good girl, you know, she wasn't as pure and innocent as Jamie Lee Curtis's character of Laurie Strode was, but I think once she got towards the end and was being terrorized by Michael, like she got put through the fucking ringer, and I thought she
Hmm.
did a really effective job of selling that trauma. And she does it even more in the next movie. Like I'll give her that credit for, I feel like we have to watch the second movie now because I've just brought it up too many times. But I think she does. It's probably the most underrated performance. I don't know if it's the best one, but she does a really great job for sure, and I think she deserves her flowers for that.
Yeah, no, I think she does a really good job here. I think she does. Here's what she does that I really appreciate. She makes human reactions to these things. So many times in these horror movies, you get these final girls that make decisions that are either so wrong, right? Or so right. And what I mean by that is they're so wrong in nobody would ever do that, or they're so right in that how would you possibly know to do that, right? Whereas Scout here, and again, we're fast forwarding, she plays it, I think, the very realistic. Like to your point, she gets really fucked up and she gets put through some stuff here, and like there's a scene where she's behind the wall and she's literally holding her mouth to keep the terror from escaping her mouth. Like that's a real human emotion. And I think she does, it's a very real performance, and I give her a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that actually because I noticed that same thing specifically in terms of how she was trying to. There were a couple times during that chase scene towards the end where she was trying to cover her mouth and hold her breath so she couldn't be heard. And I just felt like she played that very realistically. There was one scene that I thought was kind of terrible, but I don't blame her for that. I blame sort of the writing for it. And that's when she's like crawling through the ceiling and he's trying to jab up through the ceiling. Like that's kind of a stupid idea. Like that's the sort of like why would the dumb large-breasted girl run upstairs instead of out the door kind of scream thing. Like,
Right.
why the fuck would you get in the ceiling? Like, that doesn't make any sense, but I don't blame her for that. But I agree with you. Like, she was trying to contain herself in a way that made me very anxious as I was watching it. And that's the biggest compliment I think I can give her is that it created a lot of anxiety in me watching it. And I've already seen it and I know exactly what happens, but I'm watching it thinking, oh, Jesus, like, this is really tense.
Well, I was gonna say I'm looking at my notes here, and I've been kind of giving you kind of filling you in on my bullet points here. Um, Seeing Scout and Danielle after having listened to them on their podcast is really surreal, especially when you understand that Danielle is so much older than Scout in real life. Again, we touched
Yeah.
on that. I said I actually think the backstory here about how Lori and Michael are related and about how Brackett covered up the fact that she was there is better than the original. And again, we touched on that too. I
Sure.
think that's really because again in the original, like you don't again I hate to compare the original to this one, right? Because they even though they're very similar, they are very different. There really isn't. Let me think. There really is no connection in the original between Lori and Michael. Is there?
Well, that's what I was just going to ask. I don't think we find out that that's her brother in the
Right.
original movie. I think that was part of the sequel. That
Right.
that came out in that came up in that second Halloween movie. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that was never a
It
factor.
wasn't a thing.
Or
Yeah.
yeah, it was just basically a slasher movie at that point.
Right. So, okay. Um, One name that we haven't mentioned yet that I have to, Brad Dourif is amazing in
Oh
this
yeah,
film. He is, he is so good that, so he's Sheriff Brackett. He's Andy's dad. Again,
and Chucky.
he's Chucky. He's Worm Tongue. To me, he's the Gemini killer from my favorite movie, The Exorcist Part Three. But
That's
again,
good.
he's really really good here. Again, I just wanted to make sure I saw him in my notes, and we hadn't mentioned him. I wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. his presence adds a lot to this movie, I think. So it's good to see him in here, and I think he brings a lot of credibility, from a horror movie perspective into this. But also, it's a good performance, and I like him. It's a little more hippie-ish than I would have guessed this
Hmm.
character to play, with the sort of the handlebar mustache and the long hair. But I do think he does really well with it. But I mentioned that obviously Daniel Harris comes into this. We also get a scene that sort of retreads the her other friend whose name I didn't write down for whatever reason, but it's the PJ Souls character from the first movie where they go and have sex in the house, and
Linda.
she Linda, thank you, and
Yeah.
she does the see anything you like thing, which honestly. I'm certainly not going to criticize the nudity because I feel like that's always fun in a horror movie, but I hate it when I kind of just generally hate it when they totally copy a scene from the original, right? Like we talked about this, and maybe we'll talk about it again if we talk about the 2010 Nightmare on Elm Street, but they took a couple of those iconic scenes and basically just reshot them. And I don't get that, and I hate it. I don't like it when films do that because it never really adds anything. And yeah, you could make the argument that it was really more of an homage to that, but also like that scene is also the one where Michael Myers kills her boyfriend, pins him up against the wall, and does the head tilt thing. And I don't see a point in redoing that. That doesn't make any sense to me. If you want to pay homage to it by like a subtle nod, that's one thing. But refilming it the way that they did in Elm Street, or they didn't do shot for shot here, but they did it close enough where it's
It was
like
close enough. Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
I don't like that. I'd rather it just be completely original than retread the ground. And maybe that's just a symptom of, or not symptom, but it's a back in the day when they were doing all these remakes and reboots, like they were doing that stuff all the time. They were doing these callbacks all the time. And I don't mind a good callback, but it's got to be a good one. It's got to be a clever one, and it's better in my opinion if it's a little bit more subtle than it is a complete word for word ripoff.
Yeah. You know what? It's and it's easy for me to sit here on a podcast 20 years later to say this. It's lazy, in my opinion. It
Yeah.
is right. I mean, it's like you don't have to write the scene. They did the butcher knife to the wall and the head tilt in the newest Halloween sequel, right? Or one of them. I don't know if it was Halloween Ends or one of them. It might have been Halloween Ends now that I think about it. Anyways, they did it there and it wasn't a shot for shot and I was okay with it, right? Because there you're like, oh, that's a nod to the original. Um, yeah, no, I agree. Again, I'm not gonna I don't mind seeing tits, but yeah, I agree. It was
Yeah.
like just yeah.
It's not the nudity that bothered me. In fact, I feel like horror movies should have some nudity in them. It just
Yeah.
feels more realistic, or not realistic. That's probably not the right word, but more authentic when we see stuff like that. But it's just like the quoting and the word for word stuff is just, I don't know. It only begs a comparison to the original, and nothing will beat the original. So don't even try it. It just doesn't
Yeah.
hold for me. But
Yep.
so Annie, who is Daniel Harris's character, she is set to babysit Lindsay Wallace, and she drops Lindsay off with Laurie Strode so that she can go hook up with her boyfriend Paul. And as this is happening, we get that scene that we kind of referenced earlier, where Loomis is trying to convince the sheriff that danger is coming, and Michael Myers is out there, and it's a really tough sell. But eventually, the sheriff kind of says, "Okay, I'll bite. We'll see what's going on here," and then we get that backstory on how all that stuff happened. And I thought that was pretty good. And then we really sort of get into the very, I don't want to say shot for shot remake, but this is where the movie starts to mirror the original pretty closely
Hmm.
from this point forward. Michael interrupts all of Annie's sexcapades, and we get one of the more brutal scenes of the movie, in my opinion. I think Daniel Harris does amazing here. And quite honestly, could be the best performance of the movie where, she's having sex with her boyfriend and Michael comes in, he pulls the boyfriend off, and she goes through this just brutal scene where she's just, you know, cut to shreds, somehow lives. But I just love the way that this scene and some of the upcoming ones where he's tracking down Laurie are shot. Like we haven't really talked about the cinematography a whole lot, but I think the way that they filmed this movie, there's a really great amount of tension and chaos, even if we're sort of bypassing a little of the suspense. There's not really a lot of suspense. There's really more just brutal horror, but the way that it's shot, it looks really good. It feels very immersive to me. I don't know.
Yeah, again, Danielle in this movie is outstanding. Every time she's on the screen, she's not chewing scenery, she's not chewing dialogue, but she's doing a really good job. Um, to your point, I'm not sure how she survives this, but she does. I'm glad she does. Um, there's one scene in here that I got a note. So there's a scene where we see Michael, and again, we're jumping around, but there's a scene where we see Michael grab Lori, leaves the two kids there, or maybe she tells them to leave. And then so Lori is struggling, and then the next scene we see Michael walking out of the house holding Lori, and you get this iconic scene where he's walking down the street holding her, right?
Yeah.
I, I'm assuming we have to assume that what he knocked her out, she passed out. I don't know, like because the like immediately right before you see her struggling, and then the next scene is he's walking out of the house holding her. So I don't know, maybe he knocked her out or whatever. Um, I actually the other thing that really bothered me in this movie, where the fuck is everybody? There's
Yes.
nobody.
Yes.
It like it
People are
took me
screaming in the streets, like
it took
kids.
me, yes, it
Yeah.
took me out of the movie. I'm like, it's Halloween, where is everybody? There's no kids, there's no adults, there's no police, there's nobody. Like, to your point,
Right.
windows are breaking, doors are slamming, people are screaming. What the fuck?
Right.
Like, it bothered me. And to the point, they fixed that in the 2018 version, where like on Halloween there's a shit ton of people out, and Michael, to his credit, is like moving up. But here, you could have killed everybody. There's nobody around. I don't get it.
Yeah.
It was my single biggest bitch of this whole movie. Where the fuck is everybody?
Yeah, I don't know if it was my biggest bitch, but it was very noticeable for me too, this most recent watch through, because there are countless scenes where people are running outside of houses and screaming their balls off, and nothing, like nobody, like there are little kids, there are bigger kids, there are grown adults, there are everybody out there trying to get some help, and seemingly nobody. It's like the entire fucking town has been nuked or abandoned or something, and it almost just feels like it's being shot on a studio lot
Yeah,
is what it feels like. And that, I agree, it took me out of it a little bit. Anytime it makes you ask, like, what the fuck's going on here, like, yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Uh,
Um, yeah. Go ahead.
no, so you mentioned, Michael tries to, Michael goes through the house. He gets Lori. I think he takes her out of the bathroom and just leaves the smaller kids in there because he's at that point focusing on Lori, and takes her to I believe it was the Myers house, the one where he got his mask, and he shows her this picture of him and her, and she doesn't really understand it, but she understands that he something's going on, and she's trying to manipulate her way out of that situation. She gets a knife and she stabs him and starts to run away, and then gets chased into a giant empty pool where Loomis finally shows up and saves her after shooting Michael. But of course, we're not done. Michael, he comes out, he emerges, he seemingly kills Loomis, which we don't even get confirmation of one way or the other by the end of the movie. And then we get like another 7 minute chase scene where Michael spears her out of nowhere into the out of the house onto the ground, basically. I cut a lot out of that because there was just a lot of chase scenes within a house where he's just destroying this house from top to bottom. The scene that I mentioned earlier where she's in the ceiling and he's this feels like a Looney Tunes scene or like a Bugs Bunny scene or something where he's just constantly stabbing up into the ceiling trying to get her and misses her like 600 times and then eventually she falls out of it. And then like I mentioned earlier, he tackles her, basically takes her out of the house, and Lori grabs the 357 and then seemingly finishes him off with a shot to the head. And from that point, we go right to the credits. Like it's a very jarring scene, and it just immediately fades to black. Not fades to black, cuts to black, and that's pretty much it. And that's like the movie. It ends in very short order like that. And I thought it was an effective ending. I guess I liked it. I would have been really pissed if there wasn't going to be a sequel to that because we assume that she killed him. Obviously, because there's a sequel, that is not exactly the case. But I thought it was a pretty effective ending for the most part. But I mean, what do you think? Did you? I kind of rambled a little bit there, but did you think it was a good ending? I personally thought the chasing went on way too long, that we could have cut after they were in that police car and Loomis and Laurie Strode were in there, but then that's when she gets pulled out and then we have another chase scene and it just kind of goes on for a while.
Yeah, yeah, the so yes, I did think at the very end, yes, I thought the shot and fade to black or cut to black I think was very effective. It's a good way to end the film. Like I said at the very beginning of this podcast, the very last bullet I've got is the brutality goes to the very end. Love it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And literally like that last scene, so Scout is sitting on top of Michael. She's like firing the chambers, and they're either
Empty.
misfires or empty or whatever. And do her face is she's covered like she's covered in blood, just like spilling blood all over. And then like the next click, it goes off and she screams and it cuts to black. I agree. I think you could have been just as effective if you could have done this exact same scene in the pool, right? Re- or at the you didn't have to go back into the house for the extra chase scene. So I think there was one extra chase that we didn't need. Um, the one thing that really bummed me out, we talked about shot for shot remakes and liking them or not liking them. The one thing that I really missed here was the scene where Michael goes off the balcony, is laying on the ground, and then they
Yeah.
come back and he's gone. And they almost did it, but they didn't. And
Right.
and like to me, that's a really iconic shot that they missed. And that like they even did it again. They did it twice in the new sequel, right? When again, this time it was a mirror image where Jamie Lee fell off and then she was gone. But again, I would have liked to have seen that. I think if you're going to do one shot for shot, I would have rather had this one versus the PJ
Yeah.
Souls one. Um,
Right.
but yeah, no, I think it was a good. I think it was a good way to end it. I do think the picture, and I mentioned it earlier in the podcast, the picture scene where Michael presents the picture to her, I think is a nice touch. Lori doesn't understand what it is. We do as the audience. We understand that it's Boo. It's
Yeah.
Michael's sister. And we also understand that there's a little bit of humanity left in Michael, right? And that's so if you remember, he like gets on his knees and he's still fucking taller than she
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
gets on his knees, hands her the picture, and that's when she stabs him, right? And so like I think that's probably Rob's way of saying, okay, like that's the last bit of humanity, right? He like presented her with this token of his quote love, effect, whatever it is, and
Yeah.
she literally took and tried to kill him, and then he puts the mask back on, and then it's go time from there.
Yeah.
Um, so that was a good, in my mind, that was, it doesn't explain all the killings, right? But it does attempt to explain Michael's infatuation with Lori, even if she doesn't understand it. So I
Yeah.
appreciated that.
Yeah, I thought that was well done, and I think that again, it would have been less impactful if he had spared Danny Trejo at the beginning, right? Because it's like,
Sure.
why is he making that connection with Lori and also Danny Trejo? Like
Right. Right.
everybody loves Danny
Right.
Trejo,
Yeah.
but like,
Right.
he needs to die. Like that's just a simple
Yeah.
thing. Here's the question that I was going to ask, and maybe I misread this whole thing, but how many guns does Loomis have? Because it was not the 357 that he used to
That
shoot
was definitely
Michael
not the three. No,
in
it
the
was not.
pool, right? He
No.
didn't use that. So how fucking packed is he right now? And
And where is the 357? I like
why would you choose to use the pea shooter that he was using?
right.
To start, like I use 357. If I see a big motherfucker in a mask coming my way, I'm going to use the biggest gun I have
Right.
from the beginning.
Right.
Not quite sure why he chose to do that or why he had two guns in his pocket. Like he didn't have a holster from what I could tell. So there was some confusion there. Glad he
I
stopped him, but also what was that?
Yeah, the only thing I can think is maybe that was a continuity thing, and maybe was that Brackett's gun. I don't know, but yeah, that was definitely not the 357 that he got in the shop earlier, for sure.
From Mickey Dolenz, who was a
That's
monkey,
right.
by the way.
Yeah,
Because
that's
why?
right.
And, no, man. By the way, I don't remember when the Brady Bill happened and all that stuff, but basically went in there, bought a 357 Magnum, and walked right out of the store. Right? Like that
Yes.
was is
Yeah.
that was that a feasible thing at the time that this movie took
So
place?
it's funny you say that, and this might be one of those like false memories, but for I'm remembering a movie somewhere, and I thought it was this one, and apparently it wasn't, where like the guy went into a gun shop and tried to buy a gun immediately, and the gun store owner was like, "No, you can't have it right now." Is that another movie? It must be, because
Well,
it wasn't in
so
this movie.
I think what's the Michael Douglas movie, the one where he loses his shit?
Falling
Uh,
down.
Fall. I think it might have been that one,
Okay.
or maybe even Terminator. I remember there was a scene in Terminator where Schwarzenegger goes into. I don't think it was that one because I think he just took the gun and loaded it and then shot
Okay.
the guy behind the counter. But I want to say for some reason it was falling down. I might be wrong about that, but yeah, it could be some
Okay.
Mandela effect thing going
Anyways,
on.
yeah. So again, maybe he wanted the 357 and the guy wouldn't give it. I don't know. Whatever.
He got it and then he didn't use
Yeah.
it, so doesn't
Yeah.
make a lot of sense. But so that's Halloween. So that's 2007's Halloween, and I do have a specific memory. I think I remember which theater I saw this in, and I think I very specifically remember going home that night and having trouble sleeping because it
Okay.
definitely fucked with my head to a considerable amount in 2007. Now, I watched it again the other night. Certainly did not have the same effect,
Hmm.
which is understandable because that movie is really focused on messing with the viewer based on like the hardcore violence, and the hardcore violence just doesn't. It's not as impactful today as it was
Sure.
18 years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
So naturally, it doesn't have the same kind of impact. But I remember thinking, wow, what a great movie. Automatically can't wait for the sequel.
Hmm.
Um, and I think when I rewatched it the other night, that I don't think it holds up in bit for bit. Like I don't think that I feel the exact same way today as I did when I saw it back in 2007. But I will say that there are things about it that really helped push the genre along, and um, I do appreciate the way that they did some of the scenes and some of the acting. There were little enough things about it that I thought were really well done, and I don't think it deserves the hate that it got. Although, I mean, the people that were very critical of it, I can understand where they're coming from, but it's also a sort of a taste thing as it relates to Zombie and his directing style. But enough rambling for me. What did you think of Halloween 2007 as you watched it again in 2025?
Um, like I said, I remember liking this film. I remember not understanding the hate that this film got, and I still don't understand the hate that it gets. Like I enjoyed it. It's again, it's brutal. It's tough to watch. And again, it's like I'm sure, if there are some, I know there are really hardcore horror fans out there that love things like Martyrs and Human Centipede and like some of these really really hardcore horror films. That's not the horror typically. That's not the horror stuff that I enjoy. This is about as hard,
Yeah.
as visceral, as brutal as I like. Even some of the like Saw films is a bad example because like those are like kind of torture porn, but like this is about as quote real as I personally enjoy. And again, if there are fans out there that love like the really really like grotesque stuff, that's fine. I'm not judging, but like again, for me, but again, it's like this to me is a serviceable origin story. Did we need it? Well, we can have that conversation, but it's a serviceable origin story. It's not too far out there where it's unbelievable, at least to me. Um, I think the performances are there's some really good performances here. There's no really bad ones. You know what I mean? Like there's nobody here that you're like, oh my God, that's terrible. There's nobody in here that's like that. Um, I, it, you know, I would rather watch this than almost, other than maybe Halloween 2 and 3. I'd rather watch this than 4, 5, Halloween Resurrection, H2. Like, I'd rather watch it than all those. Um, this is a recommendable film today, even if you've never seen it. So yeah, I still don't get the hate. I just don't get it.
Yeah. I think I agree. I mean, I don't think it's the best movie in the series. I do
No.
kind of wish it was smarter in some places or tried harder to be smarter rather than vulgar or rather than just, you know, excessive. But I also recognize that's zombie style, and you
Hmm.
either like it or you don't. And if you don't, then this is certainly not the movie for you, and
Yeah.
neither are any of his others for that matter. But I will say that at the end of this movie, it really got me excited to see where it would go from here, because this was the first sort of rebooted horror movie that I thought had some real potential. You know, like it was successful and was interesting enough to want to continue the story. Like, no offense to anybody who loves Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but I could give two shits about Leatherface. I don't know the story well enough, or I guess I just don't care about the story well enough. But Halloween's different. It sits on a different level for me.
Hmm.
So I was like, wow, that's great. Let's get more horror movies and more horror sequels going and continuations of stories like this. So, and 2 years later we will get a sequel. We will get Halloween 2, and it will be a very different movie, and in my opinion, a very compromised movie, which, maybe we'll talk about. I'm not sure. I don't know where we go from here in terms of the Halloween season and what we want to continue to talk about with horror movies, but we certainly have some options. But overall, I like this movie. I can rewatch this movie. I don't often, but I certainly can and appreciate parts of it. If anything, there's part of me that wishes that like we could still fit Daniel Harris in some kind of a Halloween spinoff, like do a series or something of that nature, bring her back as Jamie Lloyd, as an older Jamie Lloyd or something like that. I mean, Hollywood's not above retconning the past, so let's do it. Like, why not? Let's do something because right now, I don't know where we go with the Halloween series. I know we're not talking about the Blumhouse David Gordon Green movies, but what do we do with Halloween? What do we do with Michael Myers right now? The cods are not done making money, so where does this where does this go from here?
It's a good question. So the last deep dive that we did into any film, I'm pretty sure.
It's the
Let me verify
Halloweens.
this. I think it was Halloween Ends. I think. Hang on,
Yep.
I'm gonna look. Deep
Halloween
dive.
kills, and Halloween ends.
Yeah, it was Halloween Ends, and that was November 12th, 2022.
Oh, Jesus.
That we did that, right? So that film had to have come out, either earlier in 2022 or 2021. So we're already 4 or 5 years beyond the last Halloween film, right? So I guess in my mind, that tells me, to your point, the Akads are not done making money. I don't think it's going to be with Jamie Lee. I'd love
Nope.
to see, and I know from listening to her podcast, I know Danielle would love to revisit the Halloween series, whether it's
Sure.
with Rob or with Jamie Lloyd or what have you. I'll be honest with you, I would love to see a Jamie Lloyd revival where she's the final girl, right?
She
Um,
deserves to be the final girl. I
she
mean,
does. She's
nothing
a great
against Scout
actress.
Compton. I think Scout does
Yeah,
great in these movies, but I I came away from this and the sequel thinking there's more to Daniel Harris's contribution to this, in my opinion.
yeah,
And if
she's a
Scout's in
great
those
actress.
movies, then that's fine too. I don't think we're going to see Rob Zombie ever again associated with this because he was very vocal about how distracting and terrible his experience was with the producers and the studios making making this movie specifically, but the second one was even worse. And again, maybe we should talk about that just to get into that because it was a very compromised movie. It felt very
This one or the second one?
the second one
Okay.
felt like it was supposed to be something very different. It felt like his vision of it was something very different from the way that it ended up. And it's kind of a mess. I mean, to tip my hat to what that movie ends up being. But yeah, and it's a shame because I really would have liked to have seen not only a better version of Halloween 2, but like maybe even a Halloween 3. But I don't I
Well,
think he's done
yeah,
for sure with this.
yeah. So he was originally signed on to do a three picture deal. Um, and to your point, he had such a bad experience on this one and the second one. I guess the good news is one of the producers involved in the first one is no longer around. So it was Harvey and Bob Weinstein. So Harvey's gone.
Yeah.
He's out of the picture.
Yeah, what's going on
Bob,
with Harvey Weinstein these days?
right. Bob is still doing things. I don't know if that changes Rob's feelings. My guess is based on what I've
I
seen and
doubt
read.
it.
I'm guessing. I don't think so. So yeah, I think you're right. I don't think you're ever going to see Rob Zombie in the Halloween universe again. I think Scout would come back. I think Danielle would come back. I think again, the Akkads certainly are not above making money, and I think there's still legs within the Michael universe, and we talked about it ad nauseum in those other podcasts. I think at this point you got to do a complete reboot or a sequel to the Jamie Lloyd version. I think we're done with Jamie Lee. I think we're like
Yeah.
you know
And we should be at this point.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
with all due
yeah,
respect to her, and she did great in all these movies, like
yeah,
let's let Jamie Lee go and let's move on, right? Like Hollywood needs to try to find
yeah.
I'd say try to find original ideas, even though we're talking about a sequel to a series that has been, you know, beaten to death with sequels, no pun intended. But yeah, let's let Jamie Lee Curtis be done with it. There's no more story to tell with Laurie Strode and the
Right.
Jamie Lee Curtis Avatar. So yeah, let's figure out whatever's next. If it's a complete reboot or if it's something, even if it's a complete reboot with Daniel Harris or with Scout Compton, like that, I would be great. I think that would
Yeah.
be awesome. But because there's more there. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a series or a movie, but I think we've got more story that we could potentially tell. At least I hope so, but
For sure.
it's hard to say.
All right. This was really fun. I'm glad we did
Yes,
this. I'm not sure where we're going next, but I'm pumped that we did this. This is going to be kind of like this is going to be evergreen, right? You can listen to this regardless of when you listen to it. But it's spooky season. We're in it. We're September 18th right now. I'm glad this was a great suggestion. Thank you, sir. I'm glad you came up with it. This is awesome.
absolutely. This was
Yeah.
super fun for me as well. I enjoyed watching the movie again, and regardless of where we go next, I don't know where it's going to be, but it's going to be horror movie related because
Yes, it is.
tis the season, and I can't wait to get there. It'll be so much fun.
All right. That being said, that's Mr. Pip. I'm Chewy, and this is the 411 from 406. Aloha, bitches.
Adios.